here, so let me introduce Mr. Benjamin Brokaw.
Hello, everyone. First, I'd like to thank my thesis advisor, Amy Bradenberg, my senior rhetoric teacher, Mrs. Young, for her advice and encouragement, and my parents for their support. In 1962, Dr. Joseph Murray performed the first deceased donor organ transplant, forever changing the way Americans would view corpses. Controversial from its inception, deceased organ donation was met with a mixed response. On the one hand, it could heal the dying, cure the incurable, and restore those formerly beyond medicine's ability to repair. On the other, it defiled corpses, broke the laws of nature, reduced human bodies to spare parts, and to many, disgraced the medical profession. Regardless of these individual perspectives, state governments soon realized the need to regulate deceased organ donation. In 1968, all 50 US states adopted the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, which allowed citizens to decide to donate their organs before death. In 1984, the federal government established a network for organ procurement, which allowed hospitals to pair donors with recipients with ever greater efficiency. Well, these two parts of the US organ donation system were met with widespread approval. Other aspects of it are far more open to debate. The US system could be changed in two key ways. The first is to turn it from an opt-in to an opt-out system by no longer making those who wish to donate opt-in, but rather to set donation as the default. The second is to prevent families from interfering with the donation choices of their relatives. Taken together, these changes would transform the soft opt-in system that America is using to the hard opt-out one that it ought to use. Currently, there are 124,000 Americans on the organ donation waiting list. Last year, 5,300 patients died while waiting for an available transplant. While many researchers are calling this situation an organ donation crisis, perhaps it is the crisis that will cause politicians to consider an opt-out system. While Christians recognize that death is in God's control and that we should not attempt to maximize lives saved at the cost of personal liberties, the annual deaths of thousands of image bearers of God inspires no small amount of compassion. Thus, the US should seek a solution to the organ donation gap that both maximize the benefits to society while maintaining personal freedoms. A hard opt-out system fits both of these criteria. Thus, the US ought to adopt a hard opt-out system for organ donation. A hard opt-out system for organ donation allows the majority of citizens to pick the preferred option. A large majority of Americans are in favor of organ donation, but registration rates do not reflect this. According to the US Department of Health and Human Services, 90% of Americans are in favor of organ donation, but only 58% of them are registered donors. While some non-donors may have personal concerns with donation, nearly 2/3 of non-donors surveyed would be willing to donate. An opt-out system would at once resolve these discrepancies. Much of these discrepancies are the result of the psychological barriers inherent within an opt-in system. When asked to evaluate the significance of donating organs in an opt-in versus an opt-out system, Americans responded that they felt that they were giving up 10 times as much in an opt-in system as opposed to an opt-out one. According to Gil Segal, the director of bioethics at Kiryat Ono College, psychological inertia plays a key role. Simply selecting a predetermined default appears to be effortless. Thus, a hard opt-out system would make it far easier for Americans to pick the preferred choice. A hard opt-out system would clear up much of the confusion in the current system. The current system only appears to give choice to donors. In reality, the law regularly gives family the final say regardless of the donor's written, expressed, or oral consent. Although organ procurement organizations are legally obligated to honor the decision of any patient who chose to opt in, the law has never been enforced when families are against donation. In approximately 47% of cases, families reject donation. Nearly 1/10 of those families do so against the expressed wishes of the donor. While the tragic position of these families certainly evokes sympathy, the law should not allow them to overturn their relative's dying wish. While Americans expect that their decision to donate will be honored, the current system does not honor citizens' will to donate. A hard opt-out system will return the power of consent to individuals. According to a study, often men die with their donation box unchecked, their donation choice unheard, and their dying wish unspoken. In every one of these cases, the hospital must act without the consent of the individual. Inevitably, they will act contrary to many individuals' desires. A hard opt-out system makes it impossible to act against the individual's expressed or passive consent. An opt-out system does not replace the consent gap with the government instead of families. Rather, it allows individuals to make decisions for individuals. Refutation. A hard opt-out system would destroy many citizens' trust in the organ donation system. Many Americans would view this new law as an abridgment of their freedoms. According to a study of the public perception of a proposed opt-out system in Britain conducted by Jordan Miller, PhD in psychology at Stirling University, both those who plan to opt in and those who plan to opt out consider the system an authoritarian attempt by the government to increase its control. Americans tend to value individual liberties far more than their European counterparts, rejecting multiple attempts to create a universal healthcare system. If a hard opt-out system is too restrictive even for the British, then Americans will certainly reject it before it comes to fruition. If it passed, its authoritarian appearance would cause many to opt out, decreasing the overall number of donors. Thus, the power an opt-out system gives to the government would weaken the organ donation system as a whole. Precedent reveals that the system does not work in America. Beginning in the late 1960s, over 2/3 of states experimented with an opt-out system. They allowed coroners and medical examiners to harvest and sell corneas and the occasional organ, claiming that such operations were no more invasive than an autopsy. While practitioners were not allowed to do so if the patient had objected during their lifetime, the limited oversight and the lure of profit tempted many to ignore this restriction. In one case, a coroner who made over $250,000 a year harvesting and selling corneas made every effort to ignore the concerns of the family so that he would not learn of any potential objection. Once publicized, such blatant corruption destroyed many of the public's faith in the organ donation system, causing state governments to repeal their opt-out policies. Since then, state legislators have suggested and rejected an opt-out system on 3 separate occasions. Most recently in 2011, when the bill's sponsor herself rejected it in order to avoid the anticipated public backlash. Even Colorado's premier advocacy group for organ donation opposed it, fearing that it could decrease Colorado's respectable 66% rate of donation. Thus, an opt-out system remains an unacceptable option to Americans. While a successful hard opt-out system is unprecedented in America, the situation of organ donation in America today is without precedent. With unrivaled technology, American hospitals are able to operate with an ever higher level of success. Steady investment into training and public education has resulted in continual increases in registration rates and public support. However, the current opt-in system betrays citizens' trust by not respecting their decision to opt in and giving them no ability to opt out. An opt-out system acknowledges that a greater majority of Americans want to opt in than ever before, while providing an irrefutable opportunity to opt out. Citizens can be certain that their trust in the system is well-founded, with their decision being enforced regardless of family objections. Thus, rather than destroying public trust, a hard opt-out system would validate it. Some say that a hard opt-out system could never work here. They point to Colorado. They point to American individualism. They point to the disastrous system of the 1960s. However, an opt-out system has not yet breathed its last. In fact, now is a better time for it than ever. The widespread approval is here. The crisis is here. The technology is here. All the pieces needed for an opt-out system to work are here. We just need to get them moving.
All right, thank you, Ben. So one of the problems that I see with the opt-out, and this came out, when in the states that tried it and rejected it, was it seemed like all the control goes to the doctors. Is there any accountability to the doctors to be more fair, to be less greedy, to think about the patient first instead of just their organs and what they're going to do with them?
Yes. So the difference between the system that I'm proposing versus the system that they tried in the 1960s is that this would have the list that, like, currently there's a list of people who have opted in. That's the registration list. In this case, there would be an opt-out list that every doctor needs to check before choosing to transplant the organs of their patient. So anyone who opted out is on that list and they can't do anything. It's not up to the doctor to decide. So, yeah.
But you said even though they had that in some form, the doctors would ignore it in some cases.
Yes, because the system that they used in the 1960s was saying, look, if you're performing an autopsy, then it's no worse if we take away some corneas from the body. So they had very little oversight. Like, doctors were supposed to actually do research and figure out if the donor had ever said in the past, but there wasn't an official list and there wasn't a system for finding that out well.
Thanks for taking a tough position there, Ben. Great topic. Who owns, once a body dies, who owns that body?
That is a great question. So there is some debate about that. In the past, it used to be families have some rights in order to bury the body. Like, that was how it was done. And then in the 19th century, people started digging up corpses to perform medical experiments because that was a very important thing. So the laws got stronger with, like, you can't dig up bodies. Let's see. So what am I trying to say? No one officially owns the body after death. Bodies are not property. However, there are certain things that need to be respected about bodies. That is primarily the burial and no more touching the body after it has died. But organ donation brings up a strange system where an individual can choose what they want to happen with their body after death. And if anyone's going to decide what happens to the body, it should be the individual.
Okay, so I think you answered my second question. Between the individual, the family, or the government, you're saying the individual should trump what he or she wants once it's a corpse.
Yes.
But you're also saying that's not really happening.
Yes.
Okay. And how does opt out, or what you're advocating, how does that actually answer? How does that protect? How does it protect the individual as opposed to the family or the government or the doctor?
Sure. So in the current system, there are two options that you can make. Either you can check the box to say, yes, I'm a donor, or you can leave the box blank. Leaving the box blank signifies nothing. It could be that you want to be a donor and just didn't get around to checking the box. It could be that you're vehemently against organ donation. The opt-out system says you check the box, you are against your organs being donated. That is final. No one can overturn that. If you leave the box unchecked, it symbolizes I'm opting in.
Hi, Benjamin. Doing a great job. My question is, you're claiming that that we're kind of, very well positioned on many different levels for something like this to work in our country, the number of needed donors and how people feel about donating. Yet, 2011 is very recent when somebody, took back their own bill that they had put forth because there was going to be so much backlash. So how can you claim that, our country is ready for a hard opt-out system?
Sure. In the field of like medicine, like advancements can take place fairly quickly, and also public opinion in today's age can change fairly quickly. So let's see, what am I saying? The death rate on the organ donation system was climbing and climbing and climbing until 2014, at which point I don't know the specific reason, but it started to shrink over time, and since then there have been more and more donors and more support. So there is more support now than there was back in 2011, and it has been almost a decade, which is a significant amount of time.
Thanks.
So, Ben, I'm still a little worried about the doctors, and doctors, like everybody else, are strongly motivated by the money that they can make from their organ donations. And I would imagine there's a tendency to harvest donations before a person is fully, completely passed away or completely beyond any hope. And this has been an issue on different TV shows and stories and stuff like that of people taking organs before the person is actually dead. So how do we prevent that from happening?
How we prevent that from happening is to decrease the need for organs in general, and to broaden the amount of people that you can take organs from. That would decrease the demand, and thus decrease the willingness of doctors to stretch the numbers and malpractice in order to get organs in a scarcer environment.
Ben, I'm curious about this comment about psychological inertia, and I'm not sure. I think I understand what that means, but you also write, rather than destroying public trust, an opt-out system validates it. So I'm thinking of this idea of psychological inertia. By not checking a box currently, I'm not turning over my organs upon death. By not checking a box under your what you're advocating, I am doing that. That seems really kind of counterintuitive. What other examples do you have where sort of the stipulated lack of choice or oversight actually results in public increased trust? It seems decreased trust. It seems like manipulation to me.
Okay. So this would, within my proposal of how this would be implemented, the public would be informed in advance that this is what's going to be happening, and then everyone who has a social security number or driver's license is going to receive a letter with just to update it with the new box being added to it. So the goal of this is not to like blindside people and secretly get their consent without them being aware of it. The goal is to make them all aware of it, but to make those who just are blocked by their fear of just death and who want to donate but just aren't able to actually take a positive action, just to do that more easily.
So I think that's a good point. I agree with that second point, but the first point is the goal is, and I'm just wondering, you know, people get busy, they don't see the box, they don't opt out, and all of a sudden when they're dead, we start to harvest the organs. It just seems like, oh, we're going to catch people. The fact that they missed it, now we can gain their organs. Isn't that one of the effects of this?
If someone received the letter, weren't paying attention, busy, distracted, dies, there is only a 0.3% chance that they're actually a viable organ donor. So what this would affect is whatever percent of people were not aware or didn't pay attention to the box, 0.3% of that versus the percentage of lives that we could save by implementing this and getting the, I think, of the people in favor of donation that had not opted in, like 30% of them were not willing to just take the positive action to opt in. So that would be 15% of them, 15% of non-donors opting in and getting what they want versus the 0.3% of people who don't pay attention.
So my question kind of somewhat follows Mr. Evans. It seems like there would need to be quite a push for public education on this, and an ongoing one to help, you know, folks turning 18, you know, understand what their rights are and what exactly they are opting into and out of. So my question is more has to do with like immigrants in our country and non-English speakers. It seems like, you know, in addition to people who maybe don't have family with them or around them at the time of their death, it just seems like it's a situation that would be ripe for all kinds of, it seems like I guess I'm still not hearing how we would avoid getting into a situation where people are, you know, looking for opportunities to profit. Very recently, there was a lot of, well, sad news about what they were doing with aborted fetuses and how they were using those, you know, those bodies for research, and there was absolutely no checks or balances until this came to light. So how would there be, you know, oversight and to deter doctors from trying to make a profit or take advantage of immigrants, non-English speakers, or people who just die alone?
Yes. So the doctors, like everyone, they are all fallen. We are all sinful. Greed is still a thing. But I would argue that that doesn't cease to be a thing with an opt-out system, but I do not think it would increase it. Like if someone who wouldn't show up in the organ donation registry anyway, doesn't have any family to advocate for their rights, and shows up to a doctor, I cannot guarantee you that they will not take advantage of that person. However, I do not believe, or the evidence does not suggest that having an opt-out system would increase the chance of it taking advantage of.
That is a strong note to end on, and so we will end there. Thank you very much, Benjamin. You did a great job.